We rejoin our group the morning after a night's rest at the Crofters' Cup Tavern in Rycroft. Other than Gera taking the time to ritually bond with his weapons, it was uneventful. The next morning they gathered downstairs for breakfast. As they ate a simple but delicious meal, Immeral broke the news that she was going to part ways with the other three. Her experience within the tower had been enough to confirm that she wanted a life as a scholar rather than an adventurer. She handed the scroll of Revivify from the tower to Merrick. Goodbyes said, Alistair, Merrick and Gera left the inn to a clement morning in Rycroft, the small farming town already bustling even at this early hour. They decided to head to the general goods store first, Merrick wanting more arrows. Bouldergrum's Bits and Bobs is a small but well-stocked store. I say well-stocked, if you're looking for the kinds of things which a farmer may require. Luckily, arrows were one of them, since crops and livestock need to be protected somehow. Merrick approached the counter, behind which stood a gruff-looking dwarf with red hair and a red beard. "What ye after?" he asked. Merrick inquired about arrows and was told it would be 1 gold for 20. He attempted to haggle, but Grindle Bouldergrum is not the haggling type. After handing over 1 gold piece, Merrick was given a batch of 20 arrows. Alistair then approached, asking if they had anything interesting in the shop, and mentioned that he had something he was looking to sell. Grindle explained that, as a dwarf, I'm contractually obliged to speak in a bad Scottish accent, and then called for his wife. "Echo feckin! Echo feckin! What is it, dear? I'm trimming my beard." "Echo feckin! We've got customers." "We've got what, sweetie?" "Customers." Oh, customers, you say? Well, hello!" And into the room burst a female dwarf, looking a lot like her husband in every way, down to the spectacular full red beard. Alistair attempted to sell her Wicked Wizard, but she firmly informed him that it was not that kind of store. Gera then asked if they sold potions, and after having seen Alistair's magazine, she asked Gera what type of potions he was after. He assured her it was healing potions, and she directed him to the Temple of Agar. After a little more banter with the Bouldergrums, enjoying making them speak in their awful accents, the three left and made their way to the one and only temple in the town. The Temple of Agar is a simple building, plain wooden benches, a high ceiling and glass windows, only one of them with a little stained glass. As they entered, they could see the windows hadn't been cleaned for some time, and a large, rotund and seemingly headless figure in robes at the far end. Alistair coughed. Loudly. The figure stilled, and a wrinkled green face turned to look at the group. "Yes?" The three approached the elderly male turtle and started to ask him about healing potions. Excitedly he interrupted, asking if they had come for a blessing, or perhaps to hear his sermon. Merrick wisely stepped behind Alistair and tried to sneak out of the temple. To be fair, he wasn't sneaky in the least, but being below the eye level of the Harvest Keeper, he made it out unseen. Harvest Keeper Clutie launched into his sermon with gusto. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the harvest," which was ended early by a coughing fit. He was offered a drink of water from the font, which provoked a philosophical debate on the topic of holy water and gods. Alistair explained that his water skin had been blessed by a god called the Grieved. Harvest Keeper Clutie had never heard of this god before. I'm not surprised. he was invented by Alistair, but he could be onto something. After all, I, as Chaos Mistress, have the ultimate power over the Pantheon. Eventually, after a very lengthy discussion, which somehow saw Alistair cleaning the windows, which I must say he did superbly with a performance check of 19, and Gera giving the impression that he may be hearing voices, Harvest Keeper Clutie informed them that he could indeed sell them some healing potions for 50 gold apiece. He offered to give Alistair one as payment for doing such a good job on the windows, and Alistair purchased a second. They left the temple, Clutie returning to the task of writing his sermon. Merrick was waiting outside, and the three headed to the Peace Warden's keep. Monty Broombrush was, once again, standing guard, trying to look official, an effect that was ruined by the fact that he was also picking his nose, surreptitiously looking around before eating what he had retrieved from his left nostril. Seeing the men approach, he tried to stand up even taller, asking what their business was. They informed him they were here to speak with Captain Malone, and upon finding out that they had no appointment, Monty went to a little slot in the door, opened it, and had a brief whispered conversation through it before closing it and announcing that they could enter. The keep was small, well built, a large square hallway with a door in the far corner, and a small corridor off to the right with 2 other doors in it. The furthest door swung open, and Captain Darrell Malone swept into the corridor, his luscious, flowing blonde locks shining and moving slowly as if in an invisible breeze, his silver armour adorned with blue, polished and gleaming, clearly never having been worn in battle, accentuating his bright blue eyes and chiselled jawline. He recognised Merrick, but demanded to know who his 2 companions were. Gera introduced himself, and Captain Malone looked at him through narrowed eyes. "I've met Gera, and he looked nothing like you. He was a half-orc with anger issues," Gera insisted, and the captain walked up and began to pat him down, feeling to see whether there was some illusory magic going on. After manhandling Gera to his satisfaction, he turned back to Merrick, who explained that he had found new companions within the tower, and it had been quite a harrowing experience. Malone instructed them to follow him and swept back into his office. It was a reasonably sized room, dominated by a huge desk, the walls adorned with an impressive array of medals and awards. Malone sat in a chair behind the desk, his feet up on it, ankles crossed, his hands interlinked on his chest. Whilst Merrick filled him in on their findings, Alistair took a closer look at some of the medals. He successfully swiped the one for 3rd place in a Halloween fancy dress competition and 1st place in the Rycroft beauty pageant. Malone agreed to pay the sum of 75 gold for the information, and then went on to say, "I'm afraid that while you were investigating the tower, there have been further developments, and not very good ones. We had reports of a disturbance in the woods to the northwest of the village. We went to see what was going on and came across a band of goblins. They ran, and we only managed to capture one of the little bastards. We know from Harvest Keeper Clutie that there's been some goblin activities near a cave, but they've never been this close to the town before. The river tends to put them off. If the wizards did indeed go to those caverns, I fear they may have met with an ill fate. If you would be willing to go and take a look, I can certainly ensure that you are recompensed." Nobody could speak goblin, so they had been unable to question the prisoner. Merrick asked if he could try, since it was one of the languages he spoke. Captain Malone summoned another Peace Warden, Kendall Snaggletooth, to take the troop to the cells. The most notable thing about her slightly singed appearance was her lack of eyebrows. Kendall, another halfling, led them to the small door tucked away at the back of the building. She jangled the large ring of many, many keys on her belt. as she used one to unlock the solid metal door, trying several different ones before the only one which could obviously be the right one. Stone steps descended downwards, the only light coming from some flickering sconces on the walls. The smell of stale air, unwashed bodies, and despair wafted up as she led them down the curving staircase. They emerged into a narrow stone corridor, dimly lit. She informed them that they would find the goblin in the last cell to the right, and then returned up the stairs, Alistair going with her. Gera and Merrick made their way through the jail. 4 cells, 2 on each side. Gera was sure he could hear snuffling sounds, which stopped abruptly as they approached the cell. Peering in through the bars, they could discern a small, hunched figure. Gera plucked a torch from the wall and held it to the bars to get a better look, the occupant shrinking back from the glow. Merrick, speaking in Goblin, learned that Gobbit had been running away from the caves when he became separated from his clan and was brought back here. It took a lot of coaxing, but he was able to tell Merrick that 2 tall ones had come to the cave where the goblins lived, and shortly after, strange creatures had started coming from deeper within the cavern system, attacking and killing some of the clan. This is why they were fleeing. It gradually became clear to Merrick, as Gobbit began to cry and say that he wanted his mummy, that this was not an adult goblin. Merrick threw in a handkerchief, which Gobbit grabbed and ate greedily, his face clearly betraying his lie as he thanked Merrick and told him it was delicious. Gobbit didn't mind the cells as it was dark and safe, but he wasn't being given any food. Merrick and Gera returned to Kendall and Alistair, and the 4 then went to speak with Captain Malone. Alistair attempted to swipe the large keyring that Kendall was holding, his fingers brushing hers as he failed to take them. She looked at him, a slow blush creeping upwards from her neck. Malone was surprised to learn that Gobbit was a child. The group asked if they could take someone with them to investigate the caves, as they felt this could be more dangerous than originally anticipated. Malone sheepishly informed them that Drycroft was a small town. There was just himself, Monty and Kendall was really the only capable one. Due to her recent trauma of nearly being blown up by Sandrak's glyph of warding, he didn't feel it would be ethical to send her out into the field. He was, however, more than happy to allow Gobbit to accompany them. Kendall, after a little more flirting with Alistair, went to retrieve the little goblin. As soon as he saw Merrick, he jumped onto his leg, clinging to it with his arms and legs and burying his face as the party went outside into the bright daylight. After some discussion on what to do with Gobbit, it became evident that he would be utterly useless as a guide. He had no idea what direction the caves were in, and had been on his daddy's back as they fled, but fell off when his dad tripped. Alistair managed to persuade Gobbit to let go of Merrick, and carried him back inside to where Kendall was bringing Captain Malone his lunch. Seeing the opulent sandwich, the starving little goblin leapt onto it, hungrily devouring it. Kendall promised she would keep Gobbit safe, and Alistair left. Having no more business in the town, the trio set out towards the cavern system to the northwest. The route was a roughly trodden pathway rather than any kind of actual road, and they quickly found it becoming overgrown with thick vegetation. They were able to successfully navigate their way through, annoyingly avoiding any of the nearby wildlife I'd been hoping they might stumble across. After about an hour of trudging through the undergrowth, they began to hear the sound of running water. The ground underfoot became slightly boggy, and it wasn't long before they came upon a fast-flowing river. There were no bridges or obvious ways of crossing, but there were some rocks of various sizes poking up through the water, and trees growing closely beside the river banks. Tying 2 ropes together, Gera attached one end to a sturdy tree and set out through the water. It was about 5 feet deep, but he was able to walk across the bottom. The current wasn't too strong, and he was able to reach the other side without mishap. He secured the other end of the rope, and Merrick, hanging like a sloth, effortlessly crossed above the water using the rope. Alistair was last, untying the rope from the tree, putting it round his waist, and also wading over. It was a little more challenging for him, but he too made it across, narrowly avoiding the 2 swarms of quippers that were drawn to the unusual movement. A short walk through less dense forest, and they found themselves in a clearing. Alistair melted into the shadows and began exploring the perimeter. Gera found a few bits of tattered cloth caught on some thorns, as though ripped when something ran past. There was also a discarded wooden bowl that appeared to have been dropped. Merrick found evidence of goblin tracks, moving at speed in the direction from which they had just come. All 3 converged at a couple of large trees. Alistair failed to see anything with a natural 1, and Gera failed to see Alistair as he was so well hidden, the 2 colliding with each other. Merrick, however, detected a cool, musty breeze. Pushing their way through the trees, they found themselves at the entrance to a dank cavern. And here is where we shall leave them for now. You'll have to come back another time to find out what I've got in store for them, though it seems that Gobbit is now the most important NPC in the game.